I'm Steve Conover, editor of Clockmaker's Newsletter. The American striking clock is popular with collectors and, according to many people, the most fun to repair. The parts are large and easy to handle. The movements are very forgiving and will run dependably even if they are not in perfect repair. These clocks were made by companies such as Ansonia, Ingram, Seth Thomas, and Waterbury. The movements were mass-produced and used in a wide variety of case styles. The movements varied from manufacturer to manufacturer, but the basic principles are the same. This videotape presentation will show you repairs actually being made in a way that a book, no matter how well illustrated, cannot do. By means of close-up photography, we're going to take you right inside some clock movements. The object of this video is to show you several aspects of the American striking clock. This Gilbert mantel clock, made in 1926, is housed in a simple pine case. Winding is from the front, strike on the left, time on the right. The dial is enclosed by a brass bezel holding the convex glass. It is an 8-day model, striking the hours and half hours on a coiled gong. The movement is regulated by a pendulum which beats just under 153 times per minute. The movement is held in the case by 4 wood screws. Hand removing. Some clock hands are held by tapered pins, which must be pressed out with pliers. But this clock, like many of the American models from the 1920s and 30s, has a threaded nut to hold the minute hand in place. Loosen the nut carefully with pliers. Pull off the minute hand with your fingers. Twist and gently pull off the hour hand. Begin to place all the small parts into a plastic container or small box so they will not be lost. Remove the pendulum. Then lay the clock face down on a soft cloth or towel to protect the case and the bezel glass. Remove the 4 wood screws which hold the movement in the case. In this clock, the movement is mounted behind the dial. In others, the movement is mounted to the backboard of the case. Take the movement out of the case. Set aside the case and dial to protect them from harm. Letting down the mainspring. The next stage is a critical one. The 2 mainsprings are extremely powerful and must be let down safely so all the power is contained. Let's examine one of the main driving wheels, mainspring, and ratchet mechanism. The ratchet wheel and click spring hold the mainspring in tension. An uncontrolled release of the mainspring ratchet can cause a disaster. To let down the mainspring safely, first place a wire loop over the mainspring. You will release the spring into this loop. The safest way to do this is to use a letdown key. Do not use a winding key. The letdown key is basically a key with a smooth handle. Select the appropriate key size and advance the key in the winding direction to remove the pressure on the ratchet. Next, raise the click with a screwdriver. Hold the click in this position and slowly allow the letdown key to spin in your hand. It is a matter of control. It does not require unusual strength. When the handle will not spin anymore, push a few times on the wire loop. This should release a few coils that may be sticking together. At this point, the spring should be held entirely by the wire loop. Let down the other spring in the same way. Double check that there is no power whatsoever on any of the wheels. Movement disassembly. Prior to disassembly, double check both mainsprings to be sure that they are completely let down. To disassemble this type of movement, remove the nuts or pins holding the plates together. Do not use pliers on the nuts. Instead, loosen them with a hex socket like this one. This reduces the risk of damage to the movement. If you are worried about being able to assemble the parts into their correct places later on, take a photo or make a sketch. After doing 1 or 2 8-day American movements, you may feel it is not necessary. After all, the movements are similar in many ways. Most have the same general layout of gear trains. Parts such as the count lever and hammer look much the same in a Gilbert movement as they do in a Seth Thomas or a Sessions. It may seem complicated to you at first, but with a little practice, you will be able to disassemble and reassemble these movements. General experience is more important than the details of each 8-day American movement. Remove the back plate carefully. It may be best to remove the pallets first, then the hammer. Some parts may fall out, but most of the pivots will remain seated in the front plate. Remove the parts in any sequence that is easy for you. Here we remove the fly, the locking wheel, the time third wheel, the escape wheel, the time fourth wheel, the strike lifting and warning levers, the count lever, the strike third wheel, the minute wheel, the time second wheel, the strike second wheel, the time main wheel, the strike main wheel, the center arbor, the hour wheel, and finally, the count wheel. Before the parts can be cleaned, the mainspring must be completely uncoiled. There are inexpensive clamps available to enable you to clamp the main wheel. However, I have never felt completely secure with such methods. A good quality mainspring winder such as this one is an indispensable tool for this task. To relieve the spring tension, wind the spring enough to loosen the loop. Remove the loop clamp and let the mainspring down completely. In this uncoiled condition, the mainspring can be cleaned along with the main wheel assembly. Unless the ratchet or click needs attention, there is no reason to remove the mainspring from the main wheel. After cleaning, rewind the mainspring back into the wire loop. This procedure is the reverse of the disassembly. Install the winding arbor into the chuck of the winder. Then, wind up the spring until it is coiled small enough so the wire loop will slip over it. When the loop is in place, allow the spring to release slowly into it. The mainspring is now held securely in the wire loop. Finally, remove the main wheel assembly from the mainspring winder. Reassembly. To reassemble the movement, sort the parts into two groups, time and strike. This is not difficult to do because most strike parts have pins, cams, or levers which identify them. Place the brass front plate on the bench, propped up to make it easy to work on. One by one, install all the arbors into this plate. In this movement, we chose to begin with a center arbor and hour wheel, followed by the time second wheel, time third wheel, minute wheel, time fourth wheel, and escape wheel. We continue with the count wheel. Adjust the tension washer so the count wheel turns easily but is not loose. Next, add the strike second wheel, strike third wheel, then the strike lifting and warning lever. Then add the count lever. Move the parts into place as you go along, but be prepared for them to come loose or even fall out of the movement again. We add the locking wheel, then the fly, followed by the time main wheel, and the strike main wheel. Finally, the hammer is added. Everything is now in place except the pallets. In another movement, it might have been easier to install the parts in different sequence. There is no right or wrong way to do it. With all the parts in the front plate, now place the back plate on top. Work carefully around the hammer or anything else that might hook onto the plate.